I had no plans tonight. Not that I ever did much on weeknights, except drift through whatever part-time shifts or errands filled the gaps between classes. But standing in the fluorescent hum of the hotel lobby, wiping a smudge off the front desk counter, I felt something shift the moment she walked in. Her smile hit me first, warm, knowing, like she had a secret the rest of the world wasn't allowed to touch. Clara, the hotel manager's stepmother, mid-40s, with eyes that somehow carried years of both laughter and caution. She moved past the counter with effortless grace, clipboard tucked under one arm, heels clicking softly against the tile. She glanced at me, really looked at me, and I felt a strange tug, as though the universe had decided I needed to notice her tonight. I had no plans tonight, I muttered under my breath, not realizing she'd caught the words. Her lips curved, just slightly, enough that my chest tightened. "Now you do," she said, almost teasing, almost serious, and paused long enough for her gaze to linger. An invitation, though to what? I couldn't tell. I kept my hands busy, straightening a stack of brochures, though I wanted to look at her. The air between us thickened in the kind of quiet that almost feels loud. She moved with a certainty that made my own fidgeting feel childish, but not in a cruel way. More like I was a spark that hadn't quite found its flame. There was a small kindness in the way she leaned over to pick up a dropped pen, offering it to me with that same easy smile. "Here," she said. Her fingers brushed mine just for a second, too short to count, too deliberate to ignore. My palm tingled afterward, and I found myself staring at the counter long after she'd turned away, replaying it. She spoke to the receptionist behind the desk, but I only caught fragments. Her voice rich, calm, but carrying a subtle command, the kind that makes people listen without feeling bossed around. Watching her navigate the space, small gestures of reassurance, nods of approval, I realized she moved through the world like she belonged in every corner of it, and I was just trying not to stumble into her orbit. A bell jingled, pulling us both toward the lobby door where another guest had arrived. Our eyes met again in that fraction of a second that lasts a heartbeat too long. She tilted her head, a small smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth, like she knew I was caught and maybe liked it. My stomach did something unidentifiable, somewhere between nervousness and anticipation. I cleared my throat, pretending to check the lobby schedule, but my eyes kept finding her. Even from a distance, she radiated a quiet confidence that made the air around her feel different, warmer, heavier, electric in the way only some people can make a room feel without even trying. And then she was gone, walking down the corridor, clipboard tapping lightly against her side. But the memory of her smile, the way she said, "Now you do," lingered behind me, echoing louder than any thought I could have tried to quiet. I found myself wondering, what had I just agreed to? And somehow, the thought didn't scare me. It made me want to stay, to watch, to learn, to see if she meant it, or if it was just a game she played with strangers who lingered too long in hotel lobbies. I didn't know yet, but I couldn't stop thinking about her. I hadn't expected to see her again so soon. The hotel's maintenance office smelled faintly of oil and cleaning spray, fluorescent lights humming overhead, and there she was, Clara, kneeling beside a cart of luggage that had somehow tumbled over in the back hallway. "I can manage," she said, her voice clipped, almost apologetic, as if admitting weakness was a crime. I didn't move away. Instead, I knelt beside her, helping lift a suitcase onto the cart. My hands brushed hers briefly, just enough for a spark to jump between us, and I caught her hand with mine a fraction too long. She didn't pull away, though her eyes flicked to mine, guarded. She laughed softly, a sound that didn't quite reach her eyes, and I noticed the faint shadows beneath them, the tired line along her jaw. She hadn't slept enough, or maybe she'd carried too much. And somehow, seeing that made her seem smaller, more human, not the untouchable woman from the lobby. "You're always so careful," I said, letting the words float in the quiet room. Her fingers froze mid-grip on the cart handle, and she swallowed. "I have to be," she murmured, voice almost breaking, though she tried to disguise it with a sigh. She looked away, biting her lip, and I realized she'd said more than she intended. I wanted to ask what she meant, to offer reassurance, but I stayed silent, watching instead. The small flex of her hand, the way her shoulders slumped slightly when she thought no one was looking, it was enough. Enough to make me notice, to care quietly, secretly, without pressing. A bead of sweat slid down her temple as she straightened, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. I almost reached out, almost touched the fine line of her jaw, but I stopped. Some instincts are louder than others, and this one was telling me patience mattered more than boldness. "You're too gentle for this work," she said finally, voice quieter, almost vulnerable. "I mean, you don't need to be." I shrugged, trying to seem casual, but my eyes never left hers. "Maybe I just like noticing things," I said softly. The words weren't clever, weren't meant to impress. They were meant to linger in the space between us. For a moment, nothing happened. We both shifted slightly, avoiding the invisible line we weren't supposed to cross. But then, she glanced down at her hands again, flexing them almost unconsciously, and I noticed the faint tremor when she gripped the cart. I didn't comment. I just held her gaze for a heartbeat longer than polite, longer than expected. And when she looked back at me, there was a flash, a brief, unspeakable acknowledgement that we both felt it. The pull, the tension, the quiet weight of something unallowed hovering in the air. Then she smiled, just a fraction, almost shyly, and for a second, the hallway seemed warmer, narrower, like the world had shrunk around us. My chest tightened, and I couldn't stop thinking about the small vulnerability she'd shown, the way her laugh faltered, the way she hadn't turned away. And somehow, without a word, that fragile moment wrapped itself around me, leaving me suspended, wanting more, but knowing that more might be impossible. The storm had rolled in without warning, rain hammering against the hotel windows in a rhythm that made the lobby feel both smaller and more isolated. Clara and I found ourselves alone in the storage room, straightening stacks of linens that had been soaked by a leaky pipe. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly above us, casting long shadows across the tile floor. I caught her glance, fleeting, when a droplet of water slipped from her sleeve. She blinked, almost embarrassed, and I handed her a towel without thinking. Our fingers brushed, again, briefly, but enough to make the air feel thick between us. "You always notice everything," she said, her voice quieter this time, almost conspiratorial. She leaned against the counter for a moment, sighing softly. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but the words wouldn't come. She looked tired, more than tired, like she carried a load she didn't want to show anyone. I studied the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw tightened when she smiled politely at me. I wanted to reach out, to smooth away the invisible weight, but I restrained myself. The silence stretched, only broken by the rain. I wanted to speak, to say something meaningful, but all I managed was, "You don't have to do this alone." Her lips parted slightly, a whisper of a confession almost ready to escape, but then her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen, eyes tightening. I caught a name, someone from her past, and her smile faltered, replaced by the careful mask she always wore around strangers. "Duty calls," she said, shaking her head and stepping back. The moment evaporated, leaving a ghost of what could have been. My chest ached with restraint. I wanted to pull her close, to say something that would make all the confusion and longing stop, but I stayed frozen. Her hand lingered near mine as she moved past me, just a fraction too long, and I felt it, an almost, a possibility hovering between us. I imagined leaning closer, hearing her sigh, feeling her shoulder brush mine. But then reality intruded. The wet tile underfoot, the office rules, the storm outside that didn't care about human hesitation. Instead, I let her pass, trying to convince myself that it was nothing, that the electricity between us was just imagination. But even as she walked away, I could still feel the pull, the unspoken understanding that almost, just almost, something could have shifted. I watched her disappear down the hall, her figure swallowed by the shadows, and realized I would replay that near touch, that unsaid confession, again and again. And I couldn't stop wondering what it would feel like to step closer, to close that space, even just a fraction, before the world forced her away. The hotel's rooftop was empty, the city lights flickering through the mist of rain that still clung to the night air. Clara stood near the edge, arms crossed, shoulders tense, as if she were bracing herself against something bigger than the cold. I stayed a few feet behind, unsure whether to speak or simply exist in the quiet with her. I don't know why I'm saying this, she finally murmured, voice barely rising above the hum of distant traffic. She didn't look at me, just stared at the horizon, where neon blurred into drizzle. I swallowed, careful not to step too close. You can say it, I whispered. She took a slow breath, like she was summoning courage she hadn't used in years. Why do we keep doing this? Her hands tightened over her elbows, acting like it's normal, like I'm not older, or whatever this is between us. I wanted to answer, but the words tangled in my throat. I noticed the little things, the way her hair clung damply to her neck, the tremor in her fingers as she tried to keep still. My chest ached. Every instinct told me to reach out, to close the gap, but another part of me hesitated, aware that some lines, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. I feel like I'm looking at something I shouldn't, I said finally, my voice low, hesitant. Something I shouldn't want, maybe. She laughed softly, humorless, like the sound was borrowed from someone else. Exactly. Then she turned toward me, eyes wide, vulnerable, unshielded for the first time. Do you even know what you're doing, Ethan? Or what this is doing to me? I didn't answer immediately. I just watched her, memorizing the tension in her jaw, the faint quiver in her lip. Her words weren't accusations, they were confessions. And in that silence that followed, everything unspoken between us became deafening. You don't understand, she continued, voice breaking just enough to make me flinch. I can't pretend anymore. Not that I ever really could. She looked away, blinking rapidly, as if holding back tears. I wanted to tell her I understood, that I didn't expect anything, that I just wanted to be there for her in this moment. But any words felt hollow. Instead, I took a slow step closer, careful, as if proximity alone could convey what I couldn't say aloud. For a long time, we stood like that, two people caught between desire, fear, and confusion, watching rain streak across the city lights. Every heartbeat sounded impossibly loud. Every breath felt fragile. And then she whispered, almost to herself, almost as if confessing to the empty night. I don't know if I can do this, if I can even want it. Her voice lingered after she spoke, a fragile thread pulled taut between us. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that it didn't have to be decided tonight, that nothing had to change, but somehow, even saying nothing felt like failing her. And for the first time, I realized the gravity of it all, that whatever this was between us, it had already started to break something neither of us could fix. The hotel lounge was quiet, late evening, the soft hum of the coffee machine and the occasional clink of cups filling the space. Clara sat across from me, fingers wrapped around a steaming mug, eyes distant. I noticed the faint tremor in her hands, the way her shoulders hunched slightly, as if carrying something heavy. I haven't told anyone this in years, she said, voice low, almost careful. About my husband. How he left. She exhaled slowly, like the words themselves were pulling something from her chest. Not just left, erased me. Like I'd never existed. I didn't move, didn't speak, but I felt my stomach twist. My mind searched for words, but the ones that mattered weren't for me to say. I simply let her speak. I was so angry, she continued, eyes glistening but refusing to meet mine. Angry at him, at myself, at the world. And then, her voice faltered. Then I realized I'd spent so much time holding on to him. I forgot how to want anything else. I reached across the table, lightly brushing my fingers against hers. She flinched but didn't pull away. I see you, I said softly, not meaning just in the physical sense, but all of her, the exhaustion, the regrets, the quiet strength she tried to hide. She let out a short laugh, bitter and soft, shaking her head. You're too young to understand. Maybe, I said, but I know what it's like to lose someone before you've even started. To want something you can't have. Her eyes finally met mine, raw and searching. The vulnerability there made my chest tighten. I noticed a faint scar along her wrist, small, almost invisible, like a secret she carried and didn't offer lightly. And for the first time, it felt like she was offering it, offering herself, even in pieces. She looked down at the mug, tracing the rim absent-mindedly. "I keep old letters," she murmured. "From him, ones I never threw away. I was going to burn them, I swear. But tonight," her fingers lingered over her purse. "I wanted to see if I could finally let go." Curiosity and fear coiled together as she opened the flap, extracting a folded envelope yellowed at the edges. She handed it to me. "Read it," she said, voice barely audible. I unfolded the paper, scanning the familiar, elegant handwriting. My heart caught, not from the words themselves, but from the tremor in her fingers as she watched me, from the quiet trust she was extending. Each line of the letter felt like a door opening, showing a life she'd tried to close off, a part of her she hadn't shared with anyone. I looked up, meeting her gaze, and she blinked rapidly, swallowing against a lump in her throat. I didn't think anyone would ever understand that side of me," she admitted. I didn't speak. I just returned her gaze, letting the moment stretch between us. The air felt heavy, but it wasn't suffocating. It was charged, intimate in a way neither words nor gestures could fully contain. And then she leaned slightly forward, almost imperceptibly, a fragile motion that somehow carried the weight of decades of loneliness and heartbreak. My fingers itched to reach for her hand again, to bridge that quiet chasm. But all I did was watch, and the world narrowed until it was just the two of us, suspended in a soft, seismic silence that promised nothing and everything. The hotel library smelled of old paper and coffee, a quiet refuge from the hum of guests and elevators. Clara sat in a worn armchair, a book open but forgotten in her lap. I perched on the edge of the chair opposite her, hands resting on my knees, careful not to crowd the space. For a long while, we simply existed there, two people sharing the same room, the same silence, neither speaking, neither needing to. The weight of all the small, impossible moments between us, the glances, the almost confessions, the shared vulnerability, settled around us like dust motes in the late afternoon light. Finally, she exhaled, slow and deliberate. "Ethan, I can't pretend anymore." Her gaze didn't waver, steady and calm, but there was something beneath it, a tremor, a fragility I'd learned to recognize. I nodded, unsure how to respond with words that wouldn't ruin the moment. "I know," I said simply. Not a confession, not a declaration, just recognition. Her lips curved faintly, the barest hint of a smile, and she leaned back in her chair. It's strange, how easy it is to feel seen, and terrifying, all at once. I felt my chest tighten at that, the air between us warm and still. "It's okay," I whispered, not as reassurance, but as acknowledgement. We didn't need to define it yet. We didn't need to name the thing that had been creeping between us for weeks. Just letting it exist quietly was enough. Clara shifted, moving a hand to rest against the armrest. Without thinking, I extended my own, fingertips brushing hers. The contact was light, tentative, almost accidental, but it carried the weight of every small moment we'd shared. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers curl slightly around mine, tentative, curious, and I felt a subtle relief, like we had crossed an invisible line without knowing it. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. Her head tilted slightly in my direction, her hair falling softly across her shoulder, and I noticed the slow rise and fall of her chest, the faint tremor in her hand. We existed in parallel, close enough to feel the other's presence fully, aware that this, whatever this was inevitable. The room grew darker as the sun dipped behind the city skyline. Shadows stretched across the shelves, and still, we remained, a quiet understanding anchoring us. No grand gestures, no declarations, just the gentle, earned intimacy of being fully, impossibly, undeniably present in each other's lives. Finally, she let out a soft sigh and leaned back fully, her hand still resting near mine. I mirrored her movement, careful, deliberate, closing the gap just enough to feel the warmth without forcing anything. The world outside moved on, indifferent, But in that small room, suspended in books, silence, and touch, everything had shifted. And as I looked at her, a faint, impossible smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, I realized we didn't need words. We had each other, quietly, fully, finally. I used to think that one night could be forgotten, that if you buried it deep enough under excuses, distance, and silence, it would fade away like an old bruise. But I was wrong. Some moments don't disappear. They stay, reshaping the people we become. That night with my stepbrother changed everything. Not because of what happened between us, but because of what it revealed. We were two lonely people, each carrying our own quiet storms, and somehow those storms collided. I remember the silence afterward more than anything. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, almost sacred. It felt like standing at the edge of something we couldn't name. In the weeks that followed, we barely spoke. Every glance felt loaded, every breath uncertain. I thought the distance would heal it, but it didn't. Healing didn't come from pretending it never happened. It came from understanding why it did. Looking back now, I can see that we were both searching for warmth in a cold house. We weren't trying to break boundaries or write some forbidden story. We were just trying to feel seen, if only for a moment. That realization softened something inside me. It made me less judgmental, more human. He changed too. The guilt that once shadowed his face gave way to quiet kindness. He started checking in more, not in the same way, not out of obligation, but with genuine care. He stopped running from himself. And maybe that's what love, in its truest form, is supposed to do. Teach you how to see someone without needing to own them. Over time, the ache turned into understanding. The memory stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like a lesson. A reminder that connection isn't always clean or comfortable. Sometimes it's messy and raw and hard to explain. But it still matters, because it teaches you where your edges are and where someone else's begin. We don't talk about that night anymore. We don't need to. The silence between us now isn't heavy. It's peaceful. It carries respect, forgiveness, and something softer that doesn't need a name. I've learned that love doesn't always look like romance. Sometimes it's just the courage to forgive yourself and the person who once saw you at your most vulnerable. It's learning to let the past exist without letting it define you. When I think about him now, I don't feel shame or regret. I just feel gratitude for the lesson, for the growth, for the quiet reminder that every soul we meet leaves a mark, whether we're ready for it or not. And maybe that's all any of us are really trying to do, to learn, to heal, to love better next time. Sparkles, if this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?